A soft, chilling silence enveloped the sprawling mansion. The sharp crack of a gunshot pierced the air, followed by the deafening silence of death. Don Giovanni, the powerful leader of one of the world's most influential mafia syndicates, collapsed, blood pooling on the cold marble floor. His bloodied hand reached out weakly, gripping the phone with trembling fingers. In his final moments, a message was sent. "It's done. The king is dead." The phone slipped from his hand as his life drained away, leaving nothing but a quiet, still void. The moment was abrupt, a harbinger of chaos. Whispers would swirl, and loyalties would be tested, but the most dangerous secret was just beginning to surface. Was this a result of revenge, or a carefully orchestrated betrayal? The world of crime was about to unravel, and the shadows would soon reveal their true intentions. The night before the assassination, Don Giovanni sat with his closest family in the mansion's dining room. The air was filled with an odd tranquility, as the patriarch spoke with pride of his empire. His son, Vincenzo, sat across from him, listening intently. Vincenzo, with his sharp jawline and neatly combed dark hair, was poised to inherit the family legacy. To him, this world was everything, but to his father it was a burden, a legacy of bloodshed and broken promises. The younger generation, eager to prove themselves, lacked the understanding of the costs of such power. Don Giovanni's eyes were tired, yet filled with an unspoken resolve. His empire was built on a foundation of trust, but the cracks had begun to show. A decision was looming. Vincenzo, unaware of the brewing storm, raised his glass, toasting to the future of the family. But for Don Giovanni, the future seemed uncertain, and the weight of his choices began to suffocate him. The next day, Vincenzo met with a mysterious figure in a dimly lit back room of the mansion. Detective Lara, a sharp, calculating woman in a dark trench coat, slid a folder across the table. Vincenzo eyed her with suspicion. She spoke in hushed tones, explaining the deal. The Mafia's hold on the city would end, but only if Vincenzo cooperated. He would be their inside man, the link between the underworld and law enforcement. Vincenzo's thoughts raced, torn between loyalty to his family and the lure of freedom from the Mafia's violent grip. This was a game of trust, and betrayal was its currency. Detective Lara promised him protection, but the price was steep. Vincenzo hesitated, the weight of his father's empire heavy on his shoulders. In that moment, his decision could destroy everything. Was it worth it to take the deal? He leaned forward, his eyes cold with resolve. The following week, Vincenzo was thrust into his first act of violence. Don Giovanni, though reluctant, ordered the execution of a former ally who had become a liability. Vincenzo stood at the door, the weight of the gun in his hand overwhelming. It was his first time pulling the trigger. The man, a former soldier in their crew, was pleading for mercy. His voice cracked, his fear palpable. Vincenzo hesitated, his finger inching toward the trigger, a surge of guilt building in his chest. It was the first true test of his loyalty to his father. In that moment, the lines between family and morality blurred. The gunshot echoed through the cold, empty hallway. The deed was done, but the toll on Vincenzo's soul was just beginning. He left the room, the blood still fresh in his mind. The night after the kill, Vincenzo walked the mansion's long corridors, trying to shake off the image of the man's pleading eyes. He had done it, but at what cost? The house felt different, colder somehow. As he turned the corner, he overheard hushed voices. Antonio, aged 30, his father's most trusted enforcer, was speaking to someone in the shadows. The conversation was about a betrayal, a hidden threat from within their ranks. The thought that someone might be working against his family shook him to the core. He was no longer sure who to trust. The walls felt like they were closing in, and paranoia began to creep into Vincenzo's mind. His world was unraveling, piece by piece, and he couldn't stop it. As the days passed, Vincenzo grew more aware of the shifting tides within the family. The whispers were everywhere, voices of doubt, conspiracies hiding beneath every surface. Late one night, in the shadows of the mansion's grand library, Vincenzo overheard a conversation between two trusted men of his father's inner circle. They spoke in hushed tones, their words barely audible over the sound of the storm raging outside. What was once an empire built on loyalty now seemed to be crumbling from within. Antonio, his father's enforcer, mentioned a rival family looking to take control. But the real shock came when Vincenzo overheard that his own bloodline, a trusted member of the family, was selling them out. Vincenzo stood frozen in place, realizing the nightmare unfolding. He had been blindly following orders, unaware of the traitor in their midst. The loyalty he had always believed in now seemed like a distant illusion. The following evening, Vincenzo confronted Antonio in a secluded corner of the mansion. The enforcer's icy demeanor gave nothing away, but the words that came from his mouth were like poison. Vincenzo demanded answers, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Antonio denied everything at first, but Vincenzo pressed him, his mind racing with the implications of what he had overheard. Finally, Antonio cracked a smile, one that sent a chill down Vincenzo's spine. He admitted everything. The betrayal wasn't just an inside job, it was orchestrated by someone much closer, a family member who had been feeding information to a rival family. The traitor was someone Vincenzo had trusted, someone who had promised loyalty, but had been plotting behind his back all along. The words felt like a punch to the gut. The world Vincenzo had built in his mind, the sense of family and honor, was shattered in an instant. Vincenzo sought solace in the company of an unlikely ally, Marco, a former rival who had once worked under the banner of a rival syndicate. Marco had been driven into hiding after the collapse of his old family, and now, driven by shared purpose, he offered his assistance. Vincenzo was hesitant at first, unsure whether he could trust a man who had once been his enemy. But as Marco spoke of the treacherous politics within the Mafia world, Vincenzo realized that they had a common goal: to expose the betrayal and take down the corrupt empire. Together, they started piecing together the evidence of the conspiracy, each piece more damning than the last. With every passing hour, the walls around Vincenzo seemed to close in tighter. The family he had fought for his entire life now felt like a sinking ship, and the question remained: could he save it, or was he too far gone to escape its reach? With the betrayal now exposed, Vincenzo faced the unimaginable. The traitor in their midst was his own brother, Giuseppe. The realization hit Vincenzo like a freight train. His brother, the one person he had trusted without question, had been feeding information to the rival family for months. The shocking discovery turned Vincenzo's world upside down. He confronted Giuseppe in the family's private chapel, the place where they had both sworn their loyalty to their father. The confrontation was heated, words exchanged that could never be taken back. Giuseppe's cold smile and the lack of remorse made Vincenzo sick. The loyalty that had bound them together was gone. Giuseppe revealed his motives. He was tired of living in his brother's shadow and sought more power for himself. The empire, their family, had become a game to him. Vincenzo was faced with a choice: to kill the one person he had loved most or allow his own family's destruction to continue. The tension between Vincenzo and Giuseppe escalated into a deadly standoff. The rival family had made their move, and the entire city was now on edge, awaiting the collapse of the mighty empire. Vincenzo stood at the precipice, his mind spinning with the impossible choices before him. To fight against his own blood, to destroy everything his father had worked for, or to betray his own moral compass and join forces with the enemy. The weight of the decision crushed him, but the final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Vincenzo realized that the rival family wasn't the only enemy. Someone within their own ranks had been playing both sides, further deepening the betrayal. Vincenzo knew that the only way to save what remained of his family was to confront the rival family head-on, and at the same time, eliminate the traitors from within. The revelation hit Vincenzo like a hammer to the chest. The true mastermind behind the entire conspiracy wasn't a rival family or a corrupt enforcer. It was someone much closer. Don Giovanni, his father, had built his empire from the ground up, a brutal empire sustained by betrayal and bloodshed. But now, Vincenzo learned that his father's ambition had led him to make a dangerous deal with the global crime syndicates, trading loyalty for power. The trust he had placed in his father, The foundation of their relationship now seemed like a cruel illusion. Don Giovanni, the man who had raised him, had been orchestrating the downfall of his own empire from the inside. The walls were closing in on him, but Vincenzo refused to be the puppet anymore. His heart burned with fury as the pieces clicked together. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a traitor's son. And if he didn't act fast, his entire world would be lost. The empire, the family, everything was slipping through his fingers. He had to make a choice: expose the truth and tear it all down, or protect the legacy his father built, even if it meant sacrificing his own soul. The night was growing colder as Vincenzo walked the mansion's hallways, his mind racing. The weight of the truth was unbearable. His father's betrayal wasn't the only secret. There were more whispers in the shadows, more alliances shifting like the wind. Marco, his former rival turned uneasy ally, had warned him that he couldn't trust anyone anymore. Vincenzo had pushed those words aside, but now they haunted him. It was true. Even Antonio, the family's trusted enforcer, had been playing both sides. The loyalty Vincenzo had placed in his father, his brother, and his allies was a lie, a web of manipulation spun by those closest to him. As Vincenzo stood in front of a cracked mirror, the reflection that stared back at him was no longer the man he had been. The rage, the grief, the sense of betrayal coursed through him like a fever. His entire identity was now a question mark. Could he ever trust anyone again? The walls of his father's empire were crumbling, but Vincenzo knew that the fight was far from over. The hardest decision was yet to come. Could he destroy everything, including himself, to take down the empire his father had built? The confrontation with his brother Giuseppe had been inevitable. Vincenzo stormed into the room where his brother waited, a smug look on his face, as if he knew this day was coming. The words exchanged were venomous, each accusation like a slap to the face. Giuseppe admitted to everything: the secret deals, the backstabbing, the manipulation of their family for his own gain. The pain of hearing the truth from the man he had grown up with, the man who had always been his equal, was more than Vincenzo could bear. His family, his blood, was no longer what it seemed. Giuseppe had sold them all out, and in doing so, had torn apart the last shred of Vincenzo's belief in family loyalty. But the worst was yet to come. As Giuseppe smirked, Vincenzo realized that his brother had been working for a higher power all along, someone who wanted to see the empire crumble. The final crushing blow landed when Giuseppe revealed the name of the true mastermind behind it all: Vincenzo's own father. The time had come for Vincenzo to confront his father. He entered Don Giovanni's study, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Don Giovanni, seated behind his large desk, looked up as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. There was no surprise, no remorse in his eyes, only a steely calmness. Vincenzo slammed the door behind him, the tension thick in the air. The conversation was blunt, cutting through the years of pretense. Don Giovanni admitted to everything: his dealings with the global crime syndicates, the manipulations of his own family, and the dark deals that had brought their empire to its knees. His words were cold, his voice devoid of emotion, as if he had already accepted the price of his actions. Vincenzo felt a surge of anger, but more than that, a crushing sense of disappointment. The man he had idolized, the figure he had looked up to, was nothing but a hollow shell of ambition. But the revelation didn't stop there. Don Giovanni revealed that Vincenzo had been the pawn in his game all along. Vincenzo wasn't the son he had wanted. He was just another piece in his father's empire, expendable when the time came. The confrontation had ended in a violent clash. Vincenzo had been forced to make an impossible decision. His father lay defeated, the empire in ruins around them. The death of Don Giovanni marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new war. Vincenzo, now the head of the family, stood alone in the ruins of the empire his father had built. His hands were stained with blood, but it wasn't just his father's blood. It was the blood of countless others who had fallen because of the empire's greed. The cost of his victory was immeasurable, but the price of survival was higher. As Vincenzo looked out over the city, he realized that he had inherited not only the power of the family, but the curse of its legacy. The Mafia world had already begun to shift in response to his father's fall, and Vincenzo knew that this war was far from over. The question was no longer whether he could rebuild the empire. It was whether he could hold on to his humanity as the weight of power threatened to crush him. After months of maneuvering, Vincenzo found himself standing at the edge of a dangerous precipice. The rival family had made their move, seizing the weakened remnants of his father's empire, and now they awaited the final strike. But Vincenzo knew that he couldn't let the battle end there. He was determined to confront the head of the rival family, Luciano, the man responsible for orchestrating the downfall of everything he had known. Vincenzo made the decision to walk into the Lion's Den, a luxurious estate, a symbol of Luciano's dominance. The mansion stood tall and imposing, surrounded by guards and security measures. As Vincenzo approached, he felt a surge of fear mixed with resolve. He had no more illusions about the man he had once sought to destroy. Luciano was just as ruthless, just as manipulative. But now, Vincenzo had something he hadn't had before: control. The final confrontation wasn't just about taking down an enemy, it was about reclaiming everything he had lost: his family's legacy, his honor, and his soul. The moment Vincenzo stepped inside the mansion, he was met with silence, the kind that pressed against his ears like a physical weight. Luciano awaited him in the heart of the estate, a large, opulent room with towering windows that overlooked the city. He was sitting at a grand table, his hands folded in front of him, a smug smile on his face. Vincenzo knew that this was the moment. The two men locked eyes, and for a brief second, it was as though time had stopped. Luciano mocked him, taunting him with the knowledge that he was the one who held the reins now. But Vincenzo wasn't afraid anymore. Every insult, every threat Luciano hurled at him only fueled the fire burning inside him. The game was over. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ending the cycle of violence that had consumed them both. But the fight that would follow would not be one of words. It would be a fight for survival, a brutal confrontation where only one could emerge victorious. As Vincenzo lunged at Luciano, the final act of betrayal began. The fight was brutal. Vincenzo and Luciano clashed, their bodies colliding with an intensity fueled by years of rivalry. The room seemed to narrow with each passing second, the once glorious mansion now serving as a backdrop to their savage struggle. Every punch, every move, was a culmination of everything they had ever fought for. Vincenzo landed a blow that sent Luciano crashing against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the room. Blood dripped from Vincenzo's knuckles, his chest heaving with exhaustion. But Luciano wasn't done. He scrambled to his feet, a grimace of rage on his face. The two men circled each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. The world outside seemed so far away in that moment, as the stakes had never been higher. Vincenzo could feel the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. In the heat of battle, everything had come down to this: the chance to destroy everything Luciano had built, and in doing so, to reclaim the control he had lost. With one final desperate surge, Vincenzo struck the blow that would end the conflict forever. Vincenzo stood over Luciano, his body trembling from the physical exertion of the fight. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of the moment hit him all at once. He had won, but at what cost? The empire was his, the bloodshed complete, but the world he had fought for now seemed meaningless. As Luciano lay dying on the cold floor, his words echoed in Vincenzo's mind. He had always known that power came at a price, but now, standing at the pinnacle of his victory, Vincenzo could truly feel the burden. The family was gone, the legacy lost, and now there was nothing left but the cold, hollow shell of the empire he had inherited. His heart ached with the knowledge that this was the price of survival. Vincenzo turned away from the body, the weight of his actions heavy in his chest. The world was no longer black and white. It had become a gray, desolate wasteland, where no one could escape the consequences of their choices. With Luciano dead, and the empire in ruins, Vincenzo stood on the precipice of his own fate. The power he had fought so hard to reclaim felt hollow now. As he walked through the mansion's grand hall one last time, he realized that there was no going back. The destruction had been inevitable. His choices had led him here. He had taken down the empire his father had built, but at the cost of his own soul. The city outside seemed as cold and distant as the legacy he now carried. As Vincenzo stepped into the night, he was left with a haunting realization. There was no true victory in a war fought with bloodshed and betrayal. The cost of survival was far greater than he could have ever imagined, and in the end, it wasn't the empire that mattered. It was the person he had become in the process. After the final confrontation, Vincenzo stood alone in the ruins of his father's mansion, his thoughts consumed by the aftermath of the battle. The walls around him, once adorned with the symbols of power and legacy, now felt empty, cold, and broken. He had inherited his father's empire, but what had it cost him? His hands were stained with the blood of those he had loved, and the weight of his choices pressed down on him like a heavy stone. The people who had once served his father were scattered, their loyalty now shattered, and the city that had once been under his family's control now seemed distant, indifferent to his struggles. He had fought for survival, but in the process he had lost himself. Vincenzo looked out the window, the city skyline bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. The world seemed to move on without him, as if his actions had been for nothing. His victory felt hollow, as though the cost of surviving the war had taken away everything he had once valued. The empire had fallen, but the world did not wait for Vincenzo to heal. As he took control of the family business, he realized that the structure of power had changed irrevocably. What had once been a tight-knit organization now felt like a fractured, unstable entity. The underworld was in chaos, and Vincenzo had no choice but to move quickly to assert his dominance. But with every move he made, the ghosts of the past seemed to follow him. The weight of his father's legacy was still heavy on his shoulders, and he couldn't escape the feeling that his own identity was being consumed by it. Vincenzo struggled to distinguish between who he truly was and who he had become in the pursuit of power. His alliances were shifting, and he found himself surrounded by people whose loyalty could not be trusted. The Mafia was a dangerous game, and now Vincenzo was the one playing it. Despite the crushing weight of his new role, Vincenzo found a brief moment of peace in the presence of an unexpected ally. Marco, the former rival who had become his most trusted confidant, sat across from him, offering a rare smile. It wasn't much, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Vincenzo felt the glimmer of hope. Marco reminded him that not everything had been lost, that there was still a chance to rebuild and make something better of the empire, even if it meant breaking free from the toxic legacy of his father. But Vincenzo knew the cost would be high. The world he had inherited was one of darkness and blood, and it would take everything he had to change it. Yet, in the quiet moments like this one, Vincenzo began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Not as his father's son, but as his own man. As the days passed, Vincenzo realized that his survival depended not just on his ability to dominate, but on his ability to forge alliances with those he once considered enemies. He had always been a man of principle, but in this new world, principles were negotiable. In a dark alleyway on the edge of the city, Vincenzo met with Lara, the detective who had once tried to take him down. Their alliance had always been shaky, built on mutual distrust and desperation, but now it was the only way forward. They had a common goal: to rid the city of the last remnants of corruption. Lara looked at Vincenzo with suspicion, but also with something else: understanding. They were both products of a world they had no control over, and they both knew the stakes of the game. It was a dangerous move, but Vincenzo was willing to take the risk. In this new world, there was no such thing as a clean slate. As Vincenzo walked away from the ruins of his father's empire, he couldn't help but wonder if there was any such thing as redemption in this world. The cost of survival had been steep, and the price of victory had drained him. He had destroyed the legacy of the family he had once idolized, and in doing so, had lost a part of himself. But now there was only the future, an uncertain future, filled with more enemies, more choices, and more bloodshed. Vincenzo knew that the war was far from over. The city was still in turmoil, and the Mafia was still a dangerous game. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the glimmer of something new, freedom. He wasn't sure if it would last, but for now, it was enough. Vincenzo looked at the city one last time before stepping into the unknown, knowing that the road ahead would be a long one, but also knowing that it was his to walk. Vincenzo stood at the edge of the city's most dangerous district, his heart heavy with the burden of his past. He had fought for survival, and now he wondered if there was any hope for redemption. His alliance with Lara, the detective, felt like a lifeline, but could he truly change? As he walked through the gritty streets, haunted by memories, he realized that his redemption would not come easily. But maybe, just maybe, he could rewrite his future if he dared to face his past. As Vincenzo sat in the back of the darkened car, he felt the weight of his loyalty to Lara pulling at him. She had offered him a chance for a new life, a way out of the underworld that had consumed him for so long. But with each decision, each alliance forged, Vincenzo couldn't escape the shadow of the man he once was. Would he be able to leave behind the empire that had defined him? The Mafia, it seemed, was a family that never truly let go. As Vincenzo pieced together the final strands of the conspiracy, the truth became clear. The betrayer was someone close to him. Marco, once an ally, had been playing both sides all along. The revelation felt like a knife to the heart. Vincenzo had trusted him, but Marco had manipulated him for his own gain. The anger surged within him, but as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, Vincenzo realized that the world he had tried to protect was already beyond saving. The fight with Marco was brutal, each blow a testament to the betrayal that had shattered their bond. But Vincenzo knew this was the only way forward. As he stood over Marco, bloodied and broken, he realized that he was no longer the man who had entered this world years ago. The chains of his past, the weight of his father's empire, had finally been broken. The path ahead was uncertain, but Vincenzo was ready to walk it alone, free from the ties that had bound him. With Marco defeated, Vincenzo realized that he had come full circle. He was no longer the man who had been consumed by his father's empire, nor the man who had sought revenge against the world. He was someone new. As he walked out of the warehouse and into the morning light, he knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be a price to pay, but for the first time, Vincenzo felt in control of his own fate. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape. As Vincenzo returned to the city, the faces of those he had lost haunted him. The empire his father had built, the bloodshed he had caused, and the relationships he had destroyed were all tied to his past. The weight of these memories pressed against him, but he knew that he could never truly escape them. They would follow him, even if he chose a new path. His legacy would always be tied to the decisions he had made, and the ghosts of the past would forever be part of who he was. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the apartment. It was Lara, her voice urgent, calling Vincenzo back into the world of danger. The city was on the brink of chaos once again, and it was up to him to stop it. Vincenzo hesitated, the weight of his past choices still hanging over him. But he knew that he couldn't walk away. The fight for the city's future was far from over, and whether he liked it or not, he was the one who had to lead it. Vincenzo met with Lara in a secluded cafe, the air between them thick with unspoken words. They had come to rely on each other, but in this dangerous game, trust was a fragile thing. Lara spoke of new threats to the city's balance, and Vincenzo knew that the game had changed. His past alliances no longer held the same weight, and new enemies lurked in the shadows. But he also realized that Lara was the only person who could truly understand the stakes. Together, they would face the unknown. The betrayal came swiftly. Vincenzo had trusted someone he thought was an ally, but now he stood at the center of yet another conspiracy. Lara, the one person he had relied on, had orchestrated the downfall of the very people who had fought for the city's survival. The truth crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He had been played, once again. His heart burned with rage and betrayal, but deep down, Vincenzo knew this was his final test. Could he survive it? Could he make it out without losing everything? The final battle had been fought, and Vincenzo emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. The city, the empire, and everything he had fought for had crumbled around him. He stood alone, looking out at the skyline once more, wondering if the price of victory was ever truly worth it. As he turned away from the city, he knew that his journey had come to an end. The war was over, but Vincenzo was forever changed. There was no going back, only forward.